Chainsaw Man. The anime that popped off in 2022 was surely interesting and I liked it a lot. But have you ever read the manga? Have you ever looked at these panels drawn by Tatsuki Fujimoto? Don't worry if you haven't, because today I will analyze his style and go over things such as the way Fujimoto draws his characters, the anatomy, the hatching, and even more. And in the end, I will try his style out myself. So let's not waste any more time and start off with the video. Firstly, it is important to talk about the way Fujimoto draws his characters. Characters are a key aspect of the scene, so let's start simple and work our way up, starting with the anatomy. The way Fujimoto draws anatomy is usually pretty simple. As long as you got a basic understanding of it, you're good. As far as I can tell, his anatomy seems to be somewhat accurate. Very often he just focuses on the outline and then he suggests important landmarks through hatching. Now, while he doesn't really do a lot for anatomy, he certainly does some important things on the faces, so let's move on to them. Because the way he is drawing faces is surely unique, but also very simple. So far, from what I can tell, his proportions seem to be pretty lifelike, except the eyes, which are sometimes a bit bigger than they are in real life. Speaking about the eyes, let's start off with them. The upper eyelids are usually drawn thicker and the lower eyelids usually thinner. The way you could explain it is usually pretty simple, just two parallel lines never meeting each other. So for the lower eyelids you have two parallel lines. The upper eyelids can have it too, but this depends strongly on the angle you're viewing the head from. And of course he also likes to draw the epicanthal fold, which is located above the upper eyelid. So far he seems to be pretty similar to Akutami Gege, the author of Jujutsu Kaisen, but the things that are really standing out to me are his eyelashes. Very often his eyelashes are just a bunch of single lines, either they can be done straight or curved, but the special thing about them is that he will sometimes go ahead and scribble around the eyelash area. And this gives off really good personality, I think. Also, something that he likes to do, which also makes his art really unique, is the way he draws irises. He likes to play around with different variations, but I think his most famous is probably the one with the extra circle inside, like you can see on his character Makima, for example. But he doesn't limit himself to lines only. For example, here he uses screen tones in his eyes. Speaking of screen tones, Fujimoto likes to use them very often and almost everywhere, so you can see them in backgrounds, clothes and characters. Moving on to noses, they are usually more of a rounded off or sharp shape, depending on the character, and he will often just add one nostril to sell the anatomy. And depending on the character, he also likes to hatch the nose bridge sometimes, which makes his art style quite unique. Also on males, he often likes to draw the nose bridge, while on females he likes to leave it out, probably to give more of a feminine look to them. But in certain angles he will still go ahead and put it in. Furthermore, we need to talk about mouths. The mouths are usually drawn in a typical manga style way, where the inside is filled with black and just the teeth are white. This is very simple but also effective. But Fujimoto doesn't just stop there. He also often follows that up with an indication for the upper and the lower lip. And he also really likes to play around with the teeth. Take Denji for example, who has more of a sharp teeth shape than other characters. Similar to irises, he likes to play around with the teeth to mainly emphasize a character. Moving on to the hair, Fujimoto usually draws more realistic hairstyles and likes to go crazy on individual strands sometimes, especially for dark hair. Usually dark hair stays fully dark with no shading, but sometimes he will go ahead and make use of screen tones. Take his character Yoru for example, he uses black there for the basic silhouette and then he draws a bunch of strands breaking out of the main shape. This indicates a more realistic and messy hairstyle. On bright hair, however, he also likes to draw a lot of strands, but he just hatches the areas the bangs are in. The center of the hair is left out most of the time. But again, this depends strongly on the scene and the detail he wants to show. Also, something I noticed is that the bangs aren't really always closed off. Sometimes he will just go ahead and use the hatching, and that's already enough for him. He doesn't need to close that silhouette off. Now, with all the itty-gritty anatomy out of the way... Wait, what? I forgot something. What was it? Ah, shit. Hands. The way Fujimoto draws hands is pretty simple actually. They are usually more of a curved and roundish shape, but he can go ahead and make them boxy too, which honestly probably depends on the character and the way he needs to draw the scene. What I noticed with hands though is that he likes to focus on the gesture instead of being really accurate. Don't get me wrong, his hands seem to be pretty accurate, but getting the gesture right when constructing hands is usually more important than being 100% accurate. And also, since we are already talking about hands, how about we talk about the feet too? Although he mostly puts them in the shoes, he draws them very boxy. And right here you can see that Fujimoto knows how to draw shoes, something most artists run away from. And like the hands, he also focuses more on the gesture of the feet. Now we should have all the anatomy done. So let's move on to clothing then. Personally, I think clothes are really what sells his style. Dark clothes are usually just filled with a black shape and light will be a grayish value. Then he will go ahead and break the black edges up with some hatching, and this really sells the clothes in my opinion. On bright clothes, especially for his shirts, he likes to go crazy with folds, and he also suggests them a lot through hatching. Instead of simplifying clothes with just a few folds and the silhouette, he likes to go the extra mile, which makes his clothes really unique in manga. Now, since we're already talking about hatching, how about we move on to that? Firstly, many people might say that Fujimoto's hatching and later on the line art seems to be pretty messy, but I don't really think so. I think he doesn't really have a lot of time and therefore he needs to draw quickly, probably. But I wouldn't say that it seems lazy or like he doesn't put love inside his line work. Going over the same line a few times can give it a lot of personality too. While yeah, he may go over the same line a few times or even chicken scratch here and there, I don't really think it is as messy as many people try to make it. He just doesn't need to impress you, he just wants to tell a story. Now, talking about the hatching, he probably uses either a hatching brush or he draws the hatches in manually. Now, the ones drawn by hand look really interesting because they are not particularly perfect. He doesn't really care about making them as parallel as possible, he just hatches and then he's done. Furthermore, something I noticed he does quite often for his environments or scenes, especially if he wants them to be more captivating, is form hatching. Basically what this means is that instead of just using straight lines to hatch and using them in only one direction, he hatches around the form to show its three-dimensionality. Until now, I've never really seen this in manga because cross-hatching and parallel hatching are usually time-saving and also the most popular methods. With form hatching, however, you need to understand the subject you're drawing and it's usually a bit more time-consuming, I would say. But other than that, he likes to switch between cross-hatching and parallel hatching, although I spotted parallel hatching more often. In backgrounds, he doesn't not only hatch, but he likes to use textures sometimes too. And as said before, screen tones are almost everywhere. Now, moving on to his line art. Most of the time, you're not even going to see a lot of line weight. As said before, most people will probably say that this style is messy or lazy, but I don't really think so. It seems kinda loose and leaves a kinda messy impression, but I don't really think it is lazy particularly. I'm sure he could go ahead and make these lines ultra refined, but he just wants to get the story across really quickly in my opinion. And I personally think this makes his style really unique. Now, with all that information out of the way, it was time for me to start off with my own tries. First off, I started with 3 panel studies, and I think these went pretty well actually. First, I started by drawing his character Yoru, and she took me way too long to draw and I didn't really focus on being messy. After that, I moved on to Power, and I think she went alright. I tried to make her faster and a bit more messy and I didn't put as much care into it. After that, it was time to draw Denji pulling his chainsaw cord, and I think he went pretty alright. The shading looked pretty okay and the hatching on the clothing also. And after the panel studies, it was time to go ahead and get humbled insanely, because then I tried to make it on my own. So the first character I started off was Makima. And if you don't know, Makima is one of those characters I absolutely cannot draw. Like, for God's sake, I can't put my hand on it. I'm seeing the mistakes I did, but if I correct it, I know I'm just making it worse. Makima is just a hell of a character to draw for me. I don't know, have you got the same problem, you know, like characters you just can't draw, or am I totally alone with this? And after that I moved on to Kobeni, and while I can see the mistakes I did, I don't think they were as groundbreaking as with Makima. And after that I got a bit more used to his style and tried out Aki in about the same style I did Denji, and I think he went pretty alright. The shading and the hatching both were pretty okay, and I think I didn't mess up on the face that hard too. So out of those three, Aki is probably my favorite. So let's summarize everything. Firstly, Fujimoto likes to draw more of a standard and basic anatomy. He focuses more on getting the silhouette right and then suggests important landmarks through hatching. Furthermore, in his faces he utilizes hatching, for example, on the noses, and he also likes to scribble sometimes and makes the eyelashes really messy too. Hair is more of a realistic style. Take Gege Akutami for example, who likes to break physics a lot with his hairs, and you will see that Fujimoto draws them way more realistic in comparison. Moving on, the clothing is a really important part, especially the hatching around the black shapes really sells his style. Speaking of hatching, one of the things really selling his style too is form hatching. Other than that, he likes to switch between cross hatching and parallel hatching a lot. Next, he also likes to use screen tones a lot. And lastly, his line art doesn't really have a lot of line weight, and you can see chicken scratching or multiple strokes in the same line. Anyways, this was all for today's video. I hope it helped you out a bit, and I wish you a wonderful day.